Oh hi, I didn't see you there. It's Aston. Today I'm working on a 20-year-old Kawasaki W650. So this is like Kawasaki's version of a Triumph Bonneville, if you can imagine that. It's a 2-cylinder 650cc parallel twin. Pretty sure it's air cooled, although I think it has an oil cooler on the front of it, which is cool. So I tried cleaning its carburetors like months ago at this point, weeks and weeks ago. It did not work out very well, and then I found out that my ultrasonic cleaner, the one that I've had for 10 years, has broken. It is kaput. It is shit. It needed to be replaced, so I bought a new one. And I really think that the reason his carburetors did not come clean the way that they should have come clean was because the ultrasonic cleaner, my ultrasonic cleaner, it broke. So now I'm trucking the new one over to his place, and we're gonna see about cleaning these carburetors very thoroughly in my brand new ultrasonic cleaner that I think I've cleaned one set of carburetors in, and we're using brand new fluid, so everything should work out really nicely. But in the meantime, I have to drive there. It's kind of a trek. It's about an hour away, so I'm on the highway bullshitting with y'all, talking shit about these fucking crazy ass stupid fucking drivers.
Alright, that's enough about the drivers on I-25. So you're catching up with me as I'm reassembling these carburetors. So I'm fitting the float bowl to the second carburetor right now, and then I'm going to have to run the screws in. After that, I'm going to have to put I might have already put the accelerator pump back together. The main thing that has to go back together in the following few shots are the slide diaphragms and the diaphragm caps, along with the slide springs. The needles need to go back inside the slides. So I've already rubbed the slides down with some 2-stroke oil that keeps them in nice shape. I've talked about this in previous videos, but 2-stroke oil is a very good trick for rubber slide diaphragms and O-rings and pretty much anything made out of rubber that needs lubricant. 2-stroke oil is great to use. You can also use silicone lube, like PB Blaster or something like that. Some people use white lithium grease. I've seen people rub all kinds of stuff onto those slide diaphragms, but I've found 2-stroke oil is something that I almost always have on hand because I work on lots of scooters, and because I always have it on hand, it's easy to use it to rub into rubber parts that need a little bit of lube. At this point, the carburetors have spent a good hour in the ultrasonic cleaner. I'll show you a shot of that now. So I actually trucked this thing all the way to my customer's garage. I then filled it with a solution of simple green and water. You can use distilled water if you want. I find it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you rinse the carburetors off thoroughly. I use the garden hose at my customers' houses. That tends to work well enough. But yeah, I found this is the best practice for cleaning carburetors, especially stubborn carburetors that don't want to come all the way clean. So getting the carburetors off of the bike is actually pretty easy. Getting them back on is a little bit more of a trick. I'll show you the whole process that I use to get them back on. So what I do is I hang the carburetors halfway off of the bike. Basically I take the number 2 carburetor and I stick it in the number 1 cylinder. I use that as like a makeshift carburetor stand. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a second or two when I switch over to that shot. I'm just finishing up putting the carburetors back together for now. But yeah, now you can see the engine with the hole for the carburetors, and I'm going to go ahead and fit them in like this, and then I'm going to fit the throttle cables onto the carburetors. So fitting carburetors onto a motorcycle or a scooter is pretty much always the same. You make enough room to get the carburetors out, and then you remove the throttle cables. You remove the fuel line, whatever vacuum lines are attached to the carburetors, whatever vacuum lines are attached to the fuel tank. And then the fuel tank generally needs to come off unless you're working on a scooter. On the vast majority of motorcycles, you're going to have to remove the fuel tank, often the seat as well, sometimes even the airbox. You can even end up needing to remove parts of the rear fender in order to remove parts of the airbox in order to make just barely enough room to pop the carburetors out. Luckily on this Kawasaki, there's kind of a neat design with the airbox boots. So it doesn't even use a hose clamp on the airbox boot. It uses these spring clamps that you can replace with safety wire if you want to. But they accordion inward into the airbox, and that gives you about 1.5 inches of room in order to pull the carburetors out and then slide them off to the side. So you're going to see me, now that I've fitted the throttle cables, that didn't take long at all, right? I mean, this video is sped up, but it's only sped up about 130%. And now there's plenty of room for me to just slide the throttle, slide the carburetors into place, and then fit them into the intake manifolds. This bike also had a throttle position sensor, so it's important to mark the throttle position sensor before you remove it. You will need to remove the throttle position sensor if you're using an ultrasonic cleaner. Throttle position sensors, any kind of electronic choke, stuff like that is not going to work well inside a liquid solution. In fact, you'll break it. So make sure that you take the appropriate parts off of the carburetors before you put them in any kind of liquid solution to soak or either be cleaned by sound waves, like in the case of using an ultrasonic cleaner. So yeah, you can see that didn't take long at all to get the carburetors slid into place. Now I need to fit the intake boots back onto the carburetor, the intake sides of the carburetors. So I'm just going to use a pair of needle nose pliers to do that with. Needle nose pliers, my fingers, experience. That's all it really takes to fit these rubber boots back onto their metal housings, back onto the carburetors. So from here, it's actually really fast and simple to get the bike running again. So there's a crankcase ventilation tube that runs from the valve cover back to the airbox. I'm going to have to fit that back to where it goes. I removed it to make a little bit more room to slide the carburetors in and out, and I'll have to put it back. From there, I need to orient the vacuum line for the petcock and the vacuum or the fuel line that runs from the petcock mounted onto the fuel tank into the carburetors. All of that kind of has to be placed in the right way for it to attach back to the fuel tank. So a lot of this is just, it's finger English, if you will. It's knowing exactly how and where to move your fingers to position the parts where they need to be positioned before you go ahead and tighten them all up. This side of the bike, it's kind of interesting how packed in there all of it is. And a hot tip for working on the Kawasaki W650 in particular is if your rubber airbox boots are so corroded or so dry rotted, or if they've hardened up over time to the point where you cannot accordion them back into the airbox. I really wish I took a picture of this because it's worth showing you. But you can kind of see what I'm doing there, where I'm moving the airbox boots out. They were tucked into a certain kind of position inside the airbox. So I've accordioned them back out, and I'm going to end up using safety wire in place of the original spring clamps here. Those spring clamps are a pain in the ass to work with, and they ended up getting destroyed because the old airbox boots on this thing were so screwed up that we ended up replacing them. That made it a hell of a lot easier to take the carbs off and put them back on. I know I just described this process of getting the carburetors back on and hooked back up to the fuel tank as simple and easy or some nonsense. If this is your first time doing this sort of job, it's going to take you a long time, and it's not going to be obvious how all of these parts fit back together. You can see I've fitted the fuel tank. I had to do some stupid shit. You can see me pointing at the stupid shit there to keep the fuel tank from leaking everywhere. So his petcock did not shut off completely. So a good way around this problem, if you ever run into it, and if you work on a lot of old motorcycles, you're going to run into it. Not only that, you're going to have to replace a lot of petcocks too. And you're probably going to end up with a whole bunch of fuel tanks that are rusted from the inside out if you work on enough old bikes, but I digress. You can see me popping my makeshift fuel line off there. I have it taped up with masking tape, and then you can see the fuel tank leaking everywhere. So it's very important that these carburetors seal up properly, otherwise the whole fuel tank is going to leak onto the ground, It has nice big fuel needles set inside of brass seats that I polished up and made nice and shiny, so they should not leak. However, I would recommend to this customer that he replace his petcock. I mean, it's pretty obvious that I'm recommending the replacement. I put it on the paperwork, and not only that, I pointed out the fact that it leaks. So who knows what they cost, but it wouldn't cost that much to have me replace it. Call that $100 plus the part. Anyway, we don't talk about pricing unless I have the thing right in front of me, although I do have the thing right in front of me, so we can talk about pricing a little bit. That leaves out the service call, my shop supplies. Anyway, we're going to start this bike now. Choke on, and there it goes. It starts. It started with the choke on almost instantly, and now I'm watching the carburetors while I listen to the bike, making sure that they're not going to leak while the bike is running. I'm listening to the bike to make sure that the idle's not going to drop down, that the bike's not going to die. I'm also going to try turning the choke off here in a second or two, and then you'll hear the revs drop. I noticed this bike was pretty cold-blooded, which is normal for 20, 25-year-old carbureted motorcycles. It had to be warmed up quite a bit before it would idle off of the choke. Before it would rev properly off of the choke. You can hear me revving it right now. I'm just listening to how it comes off of idle and it hits the mid-range of the fuel carburation process, if you will. So there's kind of three separate circuits on any carburetor setup. There's the idle circuit. That's when it's just sitting there idling. There's one kind of, think of it as a circuit that dispenses just enough fuel for it to idle. Here you can see me playing with the choke. And then after the idle circuit is the mid-range circuit. So that's when you have the throttle partway open, you know, your mid-throttle, cruising on the highway kind of throttle. And then you have a fully open circuit, which is wide open throttle. And all of these circuits kind of overlap with one another, and all of the parts have to be clean, all of the parts have to be fitted properly, and even in a lot of cases the parts have to be tuned. They have to be kind of specially fitted. There's little screws that have to be adjusted, the height of the needle can be adjusted, the size of the jets, all of that can be adjusted. So in this last part, I mean, it sounds complicated because it is complicated, and tuning the fucking things has become something of a lost art, which is why I have a job and a business doing just that. So anyway, you can see me fitting the last part of the fuel tank onto the bike, and then we're going to call this thing good. So I did go ahead and test ride it. Test ride went great, so passing it off to the customer.
Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. It's Aston. So I just got done working on a Kawasaki W650. That's an old, like UJM style 650cc parallel twin made by Kawasaki. It looks a lot like a Triumph Bonneville. So it's kind of a Triumph Bonneville by Kawasaki. Anyway, once I figured things out, it's actually pretty easy to get the carbs off and back on. That was something that gave me shit before I replaced the rubber airbox boot on the right side. And then they accordion inward into the airbox. And once they accordion inward, then the carburetors will slide in place as long as you open the throttle and move the accelerator pump out of the way. So I'm just glad that this job went successfully, that the only problem was the carburetors were not clean enough, that there was nothing stupid going on beyond just some carburetors that weren't clean enough. So we got them clean enough, bike runs great. So nothing to say about that. Now it's up to the customer to test it out, take it on a few rides, make sure it's good. Give me a call if it wants to give him any shit, but I think he's gonna be fine. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, for following along. You can like and subscribe if you want. I don't really give a shit. In the meantime, y'all have a good one. Thanks, bye.